The security guard laughed so loudly that people in the marble lobby turned their heads. The man standing in front of him didn't look like someone who belonged there. His clothes were worn, his shoes were scuffed and dusty. One hand held a small backpack, and the other held the tiny fingers of a little girl who looked tired but brave. The guard shook his head with a smirk that carried years of arrogance. To him, this was just another poor man who had wandered into a building meant for the rich. But what the guard didn't know, what no one in that shining glass tower knew, was that the quiet single father standing there was about to change everything. Before we dive into this powerful story, if you believe that kindness, second chances, and judging people by their hearts matter more than appearances, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach people who need them the most. The tower stood tall in the center of the city, like a monument to success. 60 floors of glass and steel reflected the morning sunlight, making the building glow like a crown above the busy streets. Inside, everything was polished and perfect: white marble floors, golden chandeliers, quiet elevators that whispered instead of hummed, and people dressed in expensive suits, moving with confidence. This was the headquarters of one of the most powerful corporations in the country, and standing awkwardly near the entrance was a man who clearly didn't belong. His name was Daniel Carter. Daniel was 37 years old, but life had carved deeper lines into his face than most men his age carried. His brown hair was slightly unkempt, his jacket was old, and his hands were rough from years of work that demanded strength more than status. Beside him stood his 6-year-old daughter, Lily Carter. Lily clutched a small stuffed rabbit that had lost most of its softness from being loved too much. Her eyes were wide as she looked up at the towering ceilings and sparkling lights. She had never seen a building like this before. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, trying to give her a silent promise that everything would be okay. But even he wasn't completely sure of that. The security guard standing at the front desk was a tall man named Richard Hawkins. He had worked in the building for years and had developed a certain attitude toward people he believed didn't belong there. And Daniel, to him, looked like trouble. Richard's eyes traveled slowly from Daniel's orange shoes to his faded jacket, then to the little girl. Finally he laughed. The sound echoed across the quiet lobby. People turned to look. Daniel felt the heat of embarrassment rise in his chest. Years of hardship had taught him patience. Richard leaned forward on the desk and said something that made several nearby employees chuckle quietly. He was convinced Daniel had walked into the wrong building. To Richard, the idea that someone like Daniel could have legitimate business inside this corporate palace was almost funny. But Daniel wasn't there by accident. The truth was far more complicated than anyone in that lobby could imagine. 5 years earlier, Daniel Carter had lived a completely different life. Back then, he wasn't a struggling single father carrying a worn backpack. He was a brilliant engineer working on a revolutionary technology that had the potential to change energy production across the world. Daniel had never cared about fame or wealth. His dream had always been simple: create something meaningful, something that could make life easier for ordinary people. But dreams can break quickly. When Lily was born, Daniel's world became brighter than it had ever been. Then, just 2 years later, tragedy struck. His wife, Emily Carter, passed away unexpectedly after a sudden illness. The loss shattered him. In a matter of weeks, Daniel went from being a hopeful inventor to a grieving husband trying to learn how to raise a toddler alone. Work became impossible. Meetings were missed. Deadlines slipped away. Eventually, the investors who once believed in him withdrew their support. Daniel lost his laboratory, he lost his funding, and slowly he lost the life he had built. For years he worked odd jobs: construction sites, repair work, night shifts at warehouses, anything that would keep food on the table and allow him to be present for Lily. Through all those years, Daniel never stopped working on his idea. Late at night, after Lily fell asleep, he would sit at the small kitchen table of their tiny apartment, sketching designs and calculating formulas on scraps of paper. Hope was fragile, but it never completely disappeared. Then one day, something incredible happened. A global tech corporation announced a program offering billions of dollars in funding for breakthrough energy technologies. The company was headquartered in the same towering building where Daniel now stood. Daniel realized something. The concept he had been refining for years could be the solution they were searching for. But there was one problem. He no longer had connections, no investors, no professional reputation. All he had was an idea, and the courage to show up. Which is why he now stood in that marble lobby while a security guard laughed at him. Reached into his worn backpack. Richard rolled his eyes, expecting to see something ridiculous. Maybe a handwritten resume, maybe some crumpled paperwork. Instead, Daniel carefully removed a sealed envelope. Inside it was something very few people in the world possessed. A direct invitation. Months earlier, Daniel had quietly submitted a technical proposal online. He didn't expect a response, but someone inside the company had read it, someone important. The envelope carried the official seal of the corporation and a meeting authorization signed personally by the company's reclusive billionaire founder. The moment Richard read the signature, the laughter vanished from his face. The lobby grew silent, because the name on that document was one of the most powerful names in the business world. The meeting wasn't with a recruiter. It wasn't with a manager. Himself. Employees nearby whispered in disbelief. Who was this man? Why had the founder invited him personally? Richard's arrogance began to crumble as realization set in. The man he had just mocked might actually be someone very important. But Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed the document gently on the desk and waited. The truth was slowly becoming clear. Daniel Carter wasn't lost. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Minutes later, an executive assistant rushed down from the top floor, breathless and apologetic. She had been searching the building for Daniel after hearing he had arrived. When she saw him standing quietly with his daughter, her face softened with relief, because the billionaire founder had been waiting all morning. The elevators opened, Daniel and Lily stepped inside, the doors closed, and the man who had been laughed at in the lobby began rising toward the top floor. 30 minutes later, the entire building buzzed with shocking news. Daniel's invention wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. The technology had the potential to reduce energy costs worldwide and make clean power accessible to millions of families. The billionaire founder didn't just approve the project. He offered Daniel something no one expected: a partnership. Daniel Carter, the struggling single father who had walked into the building wearing worn shoes, was now the lead innovator of a multi-billion-dollar initiative. But what shocked people even more was what Daniel did next. He didn't demand revenge. He didn't humiliate anyone. Instead, he returned to the lobby before leaving that day. Richard Hawkins stood frozen behind the desk, expecting anger. But Daniel simply smiled gently. Because life had taught him something far more valuable than revenge. It had taught him empathy. He thanked Richard for doing his job and wished him a good day. And in that moment, Richard understood something that would stay with him forever. The man he laughed at wasn't just brilliant. He was humble. And that humility made his success even more powerful. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment right now to like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And before we reach the ending, tell us in the comments, judged unfairly before proving people wrong. Months later, Daniel's technology began transforming communities across the world. Energy became cheaper, cleaner, more accessible, and every evening after long days at the new research center, Daniel would return home to the small apartment he still hadn't moved out of yet. Because success hadn't changed what mattered most to him. He would sit beside Lily, help her with homework, and listen to her excited stories about school. The same little girl who once stood quietly in a marble lobby, holding a stuffed rabbit, now proudly told her friends that her father was an inventor. But to Daniel, his greatest achievement wasn't the billion-dollar partnership. It wasn't the global recognition. It was simply this: he never gave up. and he never allowed bitterness to replace kindness. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that perseverance matters, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who changes the world. Because the next wrong man someone laughs at might just be the one who proves everyone wrong.